Somewhere in America right now, in the mailroom of a state prison, a package is being opened by an officer whose job is to decide what gets through. Most of what crosses that desk is fine. Letters, photographs, paperbacks from family. Then a particular book comes across the desk, and the officer doesn't have to think about it. He already knows. He puts it in the rejection pile, fills out the form, and the inmate it was addressed to receives a slip of paper explaining that the item has been withheld. The book is not a bomb-making manual. It contains no violence. It has no illegal content of any kind. You can walk into any bookshop in the country and buy it this afternoon. It is a book about how power works. Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power has been restricted or banned outright by prison systems across multiple American states. And here is the part that makes the story genuinely strange. It is also, by many accounts, one of the most requested books behind bars. Inmates ask for it constantly. Copies circulate hand to hand until the covers fall off. Pages get torn out and passed around separately. In some facilities, it has been smuggled the way contraband gets smuggled. Two things are happening at once. The institution is trying to keep this book out, and the people inside are doing everything they can to get it in. Which raises the only question worth asking. What is in it? Today we're going through all 48 laws. Every one. And by the end you'll understand exactly why the authorities want it out of that building, and whether they're right. Here's the shape of the next half hour. All 48 laws, in order, with the history behind them. The specific reasons prison systems give for banning it, which are more interesting than you'd guess. And near the end, the part that most breakdowns of this book skip entirely. What Robert Greene himself says about people who follow his laws, and the case that the whole thing is misunderstood by admirers and critics alike. The book came out in 1998. It has sold millions of copies. It sits on the shelves of Hollywood executives, professional athletes, hedge fund managers, and rappers. 50 Cent liked it so much he later co-wrote a book with Greene. And it is quietly treated as a security risk by correctional departments. Very few books manage to be a business bestseller and contraband at the same time. Robert Greene did not set out to write a manual for the powerful. Before this book, he had worked something like 80 jobs: construction, hotel work, magazine writing, Hollywood, briefly, where he watched people maneuver around each other and got a close education in what actually determines who rises. He was in his late 30s, broke, and by his own account, fairly convinced his life had not amounted to much. He was working in Italy at an arts institute when he met a book packager named Joost Elfers, who asked him a simple question: did he have an idea? Greene pitched a book about power, not the inspirational kind, but the mechanics, how it is actually acquired, held, and lost. Drawn not from theory, but from history. Courtiers, con artists, generals, diplomats, criminals, and the people who outmaneuvered all of them. Elfers told him to write it. The result is a book with an unusual structure, and the structure matters for what follows. Each law gets a historical case where someone applied it and won, then a case where someone violated it and was destroyed. And then, this is the part almost nobody mentions, a section called the reversal, where Greene explains the circumstances under which the law does not hold, and following it would be a mistake. 48 laws. And 48 built-in arguments against them. Hold on to that. It's going to matter enormously by the end. Let's begin where the book begins. In the most dangerous room in 17th century France. In 1661, Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister of France, threw a party. Not a dinner, an event. He had built himself a chateau at Vaux-le-Vicomte that was arguably the most beautiful private residence in Europe, and he invited the young king, Louis XIV, to come and see it. There were fireworks. There were fountains. There was a play written for the occasion. The food was extraordinary. The guest list was the entire aristocracy of France, and every detail announced that the man hosting it had exquisite taste and limitless resources. Fouquet believed he was securing his position. He was demonstrating his value. Within weeks, the king had him arrested. He was charged, convicted, and sent to a fortress prison in the Alps, where he remained until he died. Louis then hired Fouquet's architect, his landscape designer, and his decorator, and had them build Versailles. Law 1. Never let the person above you feel outshone. Not because talent is dangerous, but because insecurity is. The people above you, your boss, your investor, your patron, need to feel that your ability increases their standing rather than threatening it. Display your gifts, but let the credit flow upward. Fouquet's mistake was not extravagance. It was making a young king feel small in his own kingdom. The laws that follow build out the same insight. Law 2 warns against placing too much trust in friends and suggests that a former enemy, brought over to your side, will often serve you better. A friend assumes your loyalty is owed. Someone who once opposed you knows it has to be earned and works accordingly. Law 3 is about keeping your intentions to yourself. In 1850, the Prussian parliament was arguing about whether to go to war with Austria. Most of the chamber wanted it, and the loudest nationalist in Prussian politics, a man who had spent years saying that Austrian dominance was intolerable, stood up and argued against the war. Otto von Bismarck told them Prussia wasn't ready. He spoke about Austria almost warmly. The war party couldn't understand what had happened to him. The king could. The king didn't want war either, and here was the fiercest man in the room handing him cover. Bismarck was given a ministry, then an ambassadorship, then eventually the office of prime minister. And from that office, he spent the next 16 years maneuvering Prussia into exactly the war he had publicly opposed. In 1866 he got it, and won it in 7 weeks, and Austria was finished as the leading German power. He never changed his mind. He changed what he let people see. That's the law, not lying. Most people are poor liars and get caught, simply declining to broadcast the objective. When nobody can read your next move, nobody can position against it. Law 4 advises saying less than you feel the urge to say. Louis XIV ruled his court partly through silence. He would listen to a petitioner, then reply with a single short phrase, and nothing more. People left those rooms terrified, because they had no idea what he thought. Words commit you. Silence makes other people fill the gap, and anxious people reveal themselves. Law 5 treats reputation as the asset everything else rests on. It takes years to build and 1 bad week to lose. Law 6 insists that being good is not enough. You have to be seen. Thomas Edison understood something Nikola Tesla never did. Tesla may well have been the more brilliant scientist. Edison was the better showman, and the public remembers showmen. Invisible excellence loses to visible competence, every time. Law 7 is where the book starts getting uncomfortable. Let others do the work. Make sure the credit lands on you. Law 8 says to make people come to you rather than going to them. Control the venue, the timing, and the terms, and you have already won most of the negotiation before it starts. Law 9 is the cleanest of the early laws. Win through what you do, not through what you argue. Debate hardens people. Results leave them nothing to say. The next stretch is less about attack and more about not being destroyed. Law 10 advises avoiding the chronically unfortunate and the permanently miserable. Greene's claim is that misfortune is often behavioral rather than random, and that people who generate chaos in their own lives will generate it in yours. It's a cold law, and one of the ones people object to most. Law 11 is about becoming necessary. When your removal would cost people more than your presence, you are protected without needing anyone's goodwill. Law 12 covers selective honesty. One genuinely open act, one real piece of generosity, can dismantle years of suspicion, because people who have received something real lower their guard. The example Greene uses is 3,000 years old. For 10 years, the Greek army could not breach the walls of Troy. Then they stopped trying. They built an enormous wooden horse, left it standing on the beach as an offering, and sailed out of sight as though they had given up. The Trojans pulled it through their own gates themselves. That night, the men hidden inside opened the city from the inside. The horse wasn't a military innovation. It was a psychological one. It worked because it looked like surrender and generosity at the same moment. Law 13 says that when you need help, appeal to the other person's self-interest and never to their mercy. People act reliably on what benefits them and unreliably on what moves them. Law 14 advises behaving like a friend while listening like an intelligence officer. The most valuable information anyone gives you is given casually, over a drink, when they don't think they're being asked. Law 15 is the harshest law in the book. Finish your enemy completely. Rome fought Carthage across 3 wars over more than a century. At the end of the third, Rome did not accept a surrender. The city was destroyed and the population enslaved, and Carthage ceased to exist as a power. You may have heard that the Romans salted the earth so nothing would grow. That detail is almost certainly a later invention. There's no ancient source for it, but the underlying point stands without the embellishment. Rome had learned, expensively, that a wounded rival recovers and comes back angrier. Law 16 is one of the most immediately usable. Value is created partly by absence. Constant availability makes you ordinary. Step back periodically, and people remember what you contribute. Law 17 recommends being difficult to predict. Once someone can model your behavior, they can plan around it. Consistency, in a rivalry, is a vulnerability. Law 18 warns against the opposite failure. Isolation feels safe, and it is not. It cuts you off from information, from allies, and from the early warning that only comes through other people. Power lives in contact. Stop here for a moment, because you now have 18 laws, and you can already see the outline of the official objection. When prison systems explain why they restrict a title, they generally point to categories rather than sentences. Material that could threaten the security of the institution, material that could be used to manipulate staff, material that could assist in organizing other inmates. Now look back at what we've just covered. Make yourself indispensable. Conceal your intentions. Use selective honesty to disarm someone. Play the friend while gathering information. Say less than necessary. Be unpredictable. Read that list as a private citizen, and it's a book about office politics. Read it as someone responsible for the safety of a building where the entire operation depends on staff being able to read the people in their custody, and it reads differently. That is the case for the ban, stated as fairly as I can state it. Hold it in mind, because there's a much stronger version of it coming, and also a serious argument that the whole thing is backwards. Law 19 is about knowing precisely who you're provoking before you provoke them. Some people absorb an insult. Some people spend the next decade dismantling you. Misreading which one you're dealing with is the most expensive error in the book. Law 20 advises against committing fully to any one side in someone else's conflict. Stay unattached, let others exhaust each other, and become the party both sides need. Law 21 is genuinely counterintuitive. Let people feel cleverer than you. In Imperial Rome, the surest way to die was to look like a rival. Under Caligula, men of talent and ambition were executed on suspicion alone, and the imperial family lost members steadily. One man survived the entire period, and he survived it by being embarrassing. Claudius had a limp and a stammer. His own mother is said to have used him as a byword for stupidity. He was kept out of public office, laughed at during dinners, and treated by everyone around him as a harmless family disappointment. Nobody bothered to kill him, because killing him would have been like killing the furniture. When Caligula was assassinated in the year 41, soldiers ransacking the palace found Claudius hiding behind a curtain. They made him emperor. He ruled for 13 years, reformed the courts, expanded the empire's infrastructure, and added Britain to it. Historians still argue over how much of the foolishness was real and how much was performance, and honestly, nobody can settle it. But that ambiguity is exactly the point of the law. When someone believes they're the smartest person in the room, they relax, they explain themselves, and they stop watching you. Visible intelligence puts people on guard. Apparent harmlessness opens them up. Law 22 says that when you are outmatched, surrender on purpose. Not defeat, surrender as a tactic. You keep your resources, you lower the other side's guard, and you choose the ground for later. Law 23 is about concentration. Scattered effort produces scattered results. In business, in study, in anything. Force applied at one point breaks through. The same force spread across 5 points does nothing. Law 24 deals with the social skill of the courtier. Flattery, deference, and grace, deployed lightly enough to be pleasant rather than obvious. Law 25 is the most personal law in the book, and probably the most useful to an ordinary reader. Remake yourself deliberately. In 1961, a young boxer from Louisville was in a Las Vegas radio station promoting a fight. Also booked that day was a professional wrestler who called himself Gorgeous George. Bleached hair, perfume, a robe, and an act built entirely on outrage. On air, George announced that he was unbeatable, that his opponent was a bum, and that if he lost, he'd crawl across the ring and cut his own hair off. The boxer went to the arena that night. It was packed. Packed with people who had paid money specifically hoping to watch this insufferable man get destroyed. Cassius Clay understood what he was looking at. He said afterwards that he realized people would pay just as much to see him lose as to see him win, and either way, they paid. Everything that followed was constructed. The poetry, the predictions of which round, the boasting that infuriated sports writers for a decade. It was a character, built on purpose, by a man who had watched it work on someone else. And then, in 1964, he went further than the persona and discarded the name he was born with. That's the law. Your background, your family's expectations, the role you were handed as a teenager, none of it is binding. Decide who you intend to be, and construct that person deliberately. Law 26 is cold and completely practical. Keep your own hands clean. When something unpleasant has to happen, make sure someone else's name is on it. History judges signatures. And then comes Law 27, which is the one I'd point to if you asked me why this book unsettles people. Play on the human need to believe in something, and you can build a following that will do almost anything. Greene's illustrations of this are people like Rasputin, figures who understood that human beings are not primarily reasoning animals. We are feeling animals who use reasoning afterwards to justify what we already wanted. Give someone an identity, a sense of belonging and a mission, and you have not persuaded them. You have refounded them. The person who understands this and uses it responsibly becomes a leader. The person who understands it without a conscience becomes something else entirely, and history has no shortage of examples. Law 28 says to enter any venture boldly. Hesitation is visible, and it invites resistance. People assess confidence long before they assess competence. Law 29 demands that you plan to the end. Most people plan their next move. The strategist decides how it finishes and works backwards from there. Law 30 concerns the appearance of effort. Make achievement look natural. When people see you strain, they see your ceiling. When success looks effortless, it looks inevitable, and inevitability is its own kind of authority. Law 31 is the control mechanism to watch for in your own life. Give people choices, but choices you designed. In December 1564, the Tsar of Russia left Moscow. No announcement, no explanation. He packed the treasury, took his family and a guard, and went to a fortified estate about 60 miles away. Then Ivan sent back 2 letters. The first was addressed to the nobility and the church, and it announced his abdication. He was done. The boyars had betrayed him, stolen from the state, and obstructed him at every turn, and he would no longer rule over such men. The second letter was read aloud in the public squares of Moscow. In it, Ivan told the ordinary people of the city that he had no quarrel with them whatsoever. His anger was entirely with the nobles. Moscow came apart. Merchants shut their shops. Crowds gathered outside the boyars' houses demanding they fix it. A delegation rode out through the snow to beg him to return. He let them ask. Then he accepted, on one condition: absolute authority to punish traitors however he saw fit, with no one permitted to question it. They agreed. There was no other option on the table. That was the design. The illusion of choice is one of the most effective control mechanisms that exists. precisely because the person choosing feels free and is not. Law 32 says, to appeal to what people wish were true, reality disappoints. Whoever paints the more compelling picture of what could be holds enormous influence over anyone dissatisfied with what is. Law 33 is about finding the single point of leverage in a person. The particular fear, the particular hunger, the thing they cannot be reasonable about. Everyone has one. Law 34 is deceptively simple. Carry yourself as someone deserving of respect, and you will largely receive it. The world tends to accept your own valuation of yourself until it's given a reason not to. Law 35 is about timing, and it may be the most underrated law here. The same action produces triumph or catastrophe, depending entirely on when it's taken. Impatience is the most reliable destroyer of otherwise good plans. Law 36 is elegant. What you cannot have, ignore completely. Acknowledging something gives it weight. Contesting it gives it status. Desperation makes you manageable. Indifference makes you dangerous. Now the stronger version of the argument. The objection isn't really that a person in custody might learn to be strategic. It's narrower than that and more specific. Look at Law 27 again. The mechanics of building a following out of people who need to belong. Look at Law 33. Finding the one lever inside a person. Look at Law 12. The calculated act of openness that dissolves suspicion. A correctional officer's safety depends on being able to tell genuine cooperation from performed cooperation. A facility's stability depends on people not being organized into loyal blocks around a charismatic center. This book explains, clearly and with worked examples, how to do both of those things. That's the real case. It isn't about protecting readers from bad ideas. It's an argument about one particular environment, where the ordinary distance between reading about manipulation and practicing it collapses, because the targets are in the same corridor. Whether that justifies the ban is a separate question, and we'll get to it, because the counter-argument is strong. In 1931, the American government finally brought down Al Capone. Not by arresting the organization, not by raiding every operation in Chicago. Federal investigators, principally a team from the Treasury's intelligence unit, working through his finances rather than his violence, convicted one man of tax evasion. The empire did not survive the removal of its center. Law 42. Remove the source, and the rest disperses. Almost every organization, movement, or faction draws its coherence from one person or one small node. Identify it, and you don't have to fight the whole structure. This is a law about war, but it's just as much a law about organizations, and understanding it protects you exactly as much as it arms you, because it tells you what makes a group fragile. The laws around it complete the picture. Law 37 says to create spectacle. Human attention is captured by the visual and the dramatic, never by the well-reasoned. Law 38 advises thinking as freely as you like while behaving conventionally enough not to become a target. Visible difference invites attack. Save your unorthodoxy for the things that matter. Law 39 recommends unsettling your opponent deliberately. An angry person makes sloppy decisions. Provoke carefully and let the reaction do the work. Law 40 warns against anything that appears free. Everything has a price, and when it isn't money, it's usually obligation. Law 41 cautions against stepping into a legend's role. Follow a great man in the same job, and you'll be measured against him permanently. Build your own territory instead. Law 43 says that fear produces compliance and nothing more. It works while you're watching and decays the moment you aren't. Win people's actual belief, and you get behavior that persists in your absence. Law 44 is the mirror. Reflect people's own behavior back at them. It disorients them, diffuses aggression, and occasionally forces someone to see what they look like. Law 45 advises changing things gradually. People resist disruption even when it would benefit them. Move in increments, and the transformation is complete before anyone organizes against it. Law 46 warns against seeming flawless. Athens, 482 BC. The city is holding an ostracism, a vote in which citizens scratch a name onto a piece of broken pottery, and whoever collects the most is exiled for 10 years. No charge, no trial. Just a public decision that someone has become inconvenient. An illiterate farmer who has come in from the countryside can't write his own shard, so he hands it to a stranger, standing nearby, and asks him to inscribe a name for him. Aristides. The stranger asks him whether Aristides has ever wronged him. No, the farmer says. He's never met the man. He's simply tired of hearing him called Aristides the Just. The stranger writes the name without another word. He was Aristides. He was exiled. Nothing was held against him except his reputation for being better than everyone else, and that turned out to be enough. That's the law. People are drawn to excellence and quietly threatened by perfection. A visible flaw, an admitted mistake, a weakness you let people see, functions as a lightning rod. If you don't supply one, envy will manufacture one for you, and you won't get to choose what it is. Law 47 says, know when to stop. The leaders who destroyed their own legacies were rarely the ones who failed. They were the ones who couldn't stop after winning. Success removes the sense of danger that made you careful in the first place. Which brings us to the last one. Bruce Lee said something that sounds like a slogan until you actually sit with it. Be like water. Water has no shape of its own. Pour it into a cup, and it becomes the cup. Freeze it, and it will break stone. Let it run long enough, and it cuts through a mountain. You cannot grip it, cut it, or predict it. Law 48. Take no fixed form. Anyone who commits permanently to one strategy, one identity, one method, becomes readable. And readable things can be anticipated, countered, and dismantled. The world does not stop changing because you settled on a plan. Now, the thing that both the book's fans and the people banning it tend to miss. Robert Greene has said, repeatedly, that he did not write a set of instructions. He describes the book as a description of how power has actually operated throughout history, closer to a field guide than a manual. His stated view is that the laws exist whether you like them or not, and that the person who refuses to learn them isn't standing above the game. They're losing it while believing they've opted out. And remember the reversal sections. For nearly every law, Greene himself supplies the conditions under which following it would ruin you. Crush your enemy completely, except where mercy buys you a permanent ally. Be unpredictable, except where predictability is exactly what earns trust. The laws also contradict each other. Conceal your intentions sits directly against win through your actions. Command attention sits against behave conventionally. That isn't sloppiness. A book of 48 rules that all agreed with each other would be a book about a world that doesn't exist. Which is where I'd push back on the ban, gently. A book that constantly argues with itself is a strange thing to treat as an operating procedure. And there's a broader point. Restricting reading material in prisons has been criticized for years by writers' organizations and civil liberties groups, on the grounds that the lists are often arbitrary, inconsistently applied between states, and rarely reviewed. The strongest argument against the ban isn't that the book is harmless. It's that people who have the least power in society are being kept from the one book that explains, without flattery, how power actually works. Come back to that mailroom. An officer holds a book that will be rejected because it might teach the person it was addressed to how influence really operates. Meanwhile, the same book sits on the desks of executives, on studio lots, in locker rooms. People who are not considered to be at risk of understanding it, because they already do. That gap is the most interesting thing about this entire story, and it's worth sitting with for longer than a video allows. These 48 laws are not a moral system. They will not tell you what is right. What they tell you is how the machinery works underneath the polite surface of offices, families, institutions, and governments. And whether you ever choose to use a single one of them is entirely your business. But not knowing them has a cost of its own. The world is full of people who understand these dynamics perfectly well. If you don't, you are not outside the game. You are simply losing it without having noticed you were playing. So, which law did you recognize from your own life? Not the one you'd use, the one that's already been used on you. Put it in the comments. That's always the most interesting thread under these videos. If this gave you something worth thinking about, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We break down one great book like this every week. Power is a game. Now you know how it's played. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.